The Canon 5D, is it really that special? Photographers tend to have strong opinions about gear. You might have noticed this. And they disagree, and that's what you would expect. But I don't really encounter much disagreement about the original Canon 5D. From what I can tell, at least more so than most other things, it's basically universally loved, and that's very curious. But I speak about the 5D line of cameras a lot, but the truth is I'm way more familiar with every single other camera in the 5D line than I am with the original here. If I haven't shot them myself, I've at least known or worked with someone who has. But when the original 5D was released, I was shooting the 1D, the 1DS, the 1D Mark II, and although I eventually left the 1D line for the 5D line, it was the 5D Mark II that swayed me over. But I really went back in my brain and my mental time machine to try to figure out, did I ever interact with an original 5D? I don't think so, honestly. Had you asked me before I held one in my hands just now, I would have said, sure, yes. I mean, I've shot on so many different cameras at least once, at least a few frames, especially Canon cameras. Now that I'm holding it, no, I really don't think so. I even have a fair amount of experience with the original EOS 5 film camera. I mean, I owned it for a handful of years, but just no history with the original 5D. So there's this huge gap in my experience. So here I am closing that gap. But it's interesting how history looks at things versus the way things seem in the moment. When I began shooting weddings on the 5D Mark II, I was getting a lot of 5D owners coming up to me telling me how jealous they were, how much they wanted to upgrade to the Mark II. But over time that's flipped. Both cameras are beloved classics, but I dare say the original is more beloved than the Mark II. But I experience all of my nostalgia for those 1D cameras. But most people I encounter these days feel it for the 5D cameras. They were just way more accessible cameras, so it makes sense. My Rode wireless mics were giving me all kinds of trouble. After, 4 years of working together. They just can't hold a charge anymore, more than a few minutes. So this is my first time shooting, interacting with the original 5D, the 5D nothing. And it's been a really interesting experience so far. I have lots to say about it. What strikes me immediately is how, yes, this has a similar shape to the 5D Mark II. Then again, all cameras have a similar shape, but it feels very different in the hand. I mean, different enough that I could identify the fact that I had never held it before, based on that alone. It's a bit lighter, a bit hollow feeling in the handle, in the grip, I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. Although it does kind of communicate the idea to me that it's maybe a little cheaper in its construction, but it's just a difference that I notice. It sounds very different, nothing at all like the 5D Mark II, or really any other DSLR that I can think of. It does remind me of something though, very specifically something. But I'm seeing, I'm feeling, experiencing far more differences than I am similarities between the 5D and the 5D Mark II. I realize I'm looking at this backwards, going from the 2 to the 1, but can't help it, that's my frame of reference. The experience of shooting this, the feel, the sound, how it's a bit lighter, hollow feeling like I mentioned. The sound the shutter makes. This reminds me way more of shooting a 90s era Canon film SLR. I'm reminded of my 1N, and yes, I'm reminded of my EOS 5. Makes a lot of sense that the 5D would inherit from the 5. But I've taken a long break from film. If I ever unbreak from film at some point, I bet it would make for a really interesting comparison. And I'm no collector, but I do have a handful of classic Canon DSLRs on my shelf that I love very much. Well, more than a handful, because one is basically a handful. So I have a shelf full, a very small shelf full. I'm really interested in doing some side-by-side comparisons of all these cameras. This camera versus this camera. possibly even sell a few, the ones that I decide I don't love as much. It just seems like before I can do this, before I can bestow a crown upon my absolute favorite, shame on me if I don't include the most notoriously beloved old Canon DSLR of them all in the running, so I'm going to do exactly that, although that'll be upcoming in the following weeks. For now, I'm giving this camera my full attention. And I believe I'm capable of approaching this, my review of this camera, and any future side-by-side comparisons, completely impartially. But if indeed a bias creeps in, it's definitely not going to be a bias in favor of the 5D. As mentioned, it's a very, very popular camera, and when that many people like something, my gut reaction is that it must be terrible. This is not rational thinking, I fully realize, but it is the instinctual reaction I've had to popular things for as long as I can remember. But not to worry, I don't allow myself to be swayed by that type of flawed thinking anymore. And oh boy, am I forming an opinion on this camera. It's a strong opinion. Strong positive, strong negative. Who is to say? Me is to say. It's fucking awesome. Oh my god, the mob was right. Holy shit. This camera is truly special. It has magic. I feel the magic when I use it. I see the magic when I look at the JPEGs. These have all been JPEGs straight out of camera. I love this camera. I'm blown away by this camera, far more than I ever expected to be. I'm actually kind of shocked how much I love it. This is not remotely the outcome I expected. I really imagined myself going through the motions, saying meh, and selling it. I'm absolutely in love now. Shoot a 90 Canon film SLR and this camera side by side and tell me if it's not exactly the same experience. Minus swapping out rolls of film. Minus the ongoing cost associated with shooting a film camera. I have never had a more film-like experience on a digital camera than this. And wow, do the images have a look all their own. Such a characteristic look. So much so that I wonder if I can even trust my own opinion. I'm finding myself just floored by the images. They all just pop so much more than I would have expected them to. I thought that the 1DS Mark II and the 5D shared a similar look. I own the 1DS Mark II. It's probably my favorite camera, or at least it was. And that's part of the reason I didn't expect to be very impressed by this camera. Maybe I was right, maybe they do have a similar look, but I'm not so sure anymore. We'll see in the coming weeks when I do my versus videos, but I'm doubting everything now. I got this so wrong, 100% wrong, and I couldn't be happier. I feel like I just made an amazing discovery here. But I'm colorblind. I have my own way of perceiving color. Unfortunately, or fortunately. But I'm terrified to talk about colors too specifically. But with that disclaimer, I want to say this. I love the colors. Love the colors. I think they stay very true to life, but in all the ways they don't. That they interpret, portray, enhance, skew what's actually there. It's so pretty. It looks fantastic. I don't know, these particular images aren't showing off the colors that well, but I'm shooting right into the sun or heavy light, and all cameras struggle in those conditions, classic DSLRs most of all, but I actually think this is handling it fine. And I'm shooting everything standard color profile, auto white balance, cheap lenses. But yeah, dynamic range, highlight, roll off. These are weaknesses of this and every other classic DSLR. I feel like this is better represented in like the desert shots I was shooting earlier. But I take an inordinate amount of desert photos because I live in a desert, so I have little choice in the matter. But I really notice how this camera performs color-wise in comparison to all the other cameras upon which I've photographed the desert. And I've never seen any other camera balance all of the elements so perfectly. The blue of the sky looks fantastic, not at all exaggerated. Rocks are grayish, as they should be. Shadows have a cool tone. Overall, everything kind of has a cool tone, which I like. Yet, everything needing warmth, like the plants, somehow still get it. But it's just impressive to me that it's accomplishing all of these things in one single frame. Anyway, yes, the colors are phenomenal. Just perfect. But there's also this unusual sharpness that makes everything pop. I can't quite account for it, because at least on a visceral level, it doesn't hit me as a sharpening algorithm, ugly, fake, over-sharpened, digital nonsense. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being fooled, but I think perhaps it might be attributable to the resolution of the camera. 12.8 megapixels on a full-frame sensor. The photo sites on the sensor must be pretty large by modern standards. Then again, I have some even lower resolution cameras that must also have some fairly large photo sites, but they don't achieve this effect I'm describing, right? Doesn't that just pop, look a little sharper than it should? Maybe 12.8 megapixels on a full-frame sensor is just some magic perfect number. Don't know, maybe it is a sharpening algorithm, and I'm just an impressionable moron. I mean, looking in the settings, in the standard picture style, by default, sharpening is set to 3 on a scale of 0 to 7, so there's clearly some sharpening being applied. I don't really want to conduct the experiment, drop it to 0, because I like what I'm getting. I have no desire to change it. Maybe some other time. But sharpness is by no means a measure of quality to me. Anyway, using the word sharpness doesn't quite communicate the totality of what I'm seeing, but I like my 1D Mark II precisely because it's not particularly sharp. Maybe it would be if I cranked that particular setting, but I have no desire to do so. I feel like it looks a lot like a frame of 35mm film. Not that 35mm film can't be sharp, it certainly can, but my point is just I'm not a sharpness junkie. But there's just something in the overall presentation, or a combination of things, that feels like it's sticking right out of the screen sometimes. And if what I'm seeing is achieved in software and the camera's firmware, well done, I guess, because it seems organic, analog, optical. Anyway, I just really appreciate the incredible work of everyone who contributed to this amazing tool. Top-notch engineering meets impeccable taste. And that's why this very, very special camera, the camera that brought full frame to the masses, and did so with way more style and personality than anything modern would probably ever attempt, exists. And the only other negative thing there is to say about it, the screen on the back kinda sucks. Not very bright, even less so when you're off axis. I don't care, but you might, so figured I should mention it. Anyway, that's some of the stuff that stands out to me about the 5D Nothing, because ergonomically it's not my favorite body design to hold. I like a larger camera, I like a vertical grip, I like a 1D. And the button layout is very similar to the Mark II, but slightly uglier, more primitive looking. At least that's my take. So it doesn't scream out as some sexy object that you'd want to have in your hands, but then you use it, and you realize it transcends all that superficial bullshit. It's a camera built to prioritize the act of photography. That might seem like a weird thing to say, but is it? It's rare to be surprised by a camera. And yet here I am, surprised. Alright, 5D, you've won me over. You've gained a fan today. Anyway, it's going to be super interesting, I think, when I actually start doing my versus videos. This camera versus this other camera. Curious if the 5D will hold up as well as I suspect it might.